Welcome into Foxhawk Primitive. I've got an extreme privilege while here at the Becker Head Gathering to sit down with Mr. Ethan Becker, and we're going to talk about the knife that just got sprung out on the market, the BK20, the Bundok Bowie. How you doing, Ethan?
Hey,
it's good to have you.
Always good to see you. Always good.
So, last year at the gathering, a few of us lucky guys got a chance to see the prototype of it, and we loved it. And now that the new one's come out, there's some changes.
Yes.
So, give me a little rundown about what those changes were and the reasoning behind it.
Well, let's start with where the inspiration came from.
Good idea.
I've always been a big fan of the Marine Raiders. And the second Marine Raiders, I think just before the Macon Island raid, bought 1,000 Collins Model 2 Bowie knives. And they had basically this outline, blade shape. And I am fairly certain, if I remember correctly, because I've had in my hands a couple that were supposed to be honest-to-God Marine Raider Bowies, and they were a fair amount thicker. And this had originally been issued as a model, the Model 18, as the V44 to aviators in the Marine or in the Panama Canal Zone and Hawaii, and they put a bunch of them in seat packs. And they were made eventually by Collins, by Kinfolks, and Western, and I think there were some other manufacturers during the war. But this pattern became very famous because the Raiders, who were very with reason, quite legendary, carried them on Macon, and they carried them on Guadalcanal, and all the way on their trip to Tokyo Bay. And one of the second Raiders said it was the best weapon and tool that they had, and in a jungle environment. It's compact, it's powerful, and it has a lot going for it. I have always felt, because I'm not a big fan of the full hemispherical clip, that it could be improved visually, and I've never seen a lot of sense with this part sharpened, because if you look at the tip, it severely weakens the tip, and very few people actually fight with knives these days.
Yeah.
There was a writer who wrote an article on modifying this by taking the top guard off almost all the way and taking most of the bottom guard off and opening this up so it was more comfortable back here. And as a relatively inexpensive soldier's knife. And he straightened the clip. And I thought, I like that. I can get behind that. So it's always been, for the last 20 years, it's been kind of twitching around in my head. So, and I've always kind of wanted to make the improved version. We had 2 different drawings that came out of the process with K-bar, and this one was mostly the blade design was mostly Paul Tukimoto's, and this is what my design was. So again, we have a straightened clip. It's weight forward, but not too far forward, because what this knife was designed to do was to be a machete that chopped well, and could also be used for small work. So you can get right up on stuff like moving your thumb out here, and that if you clutch up even on a pretty big knife and the blade is sharpened all the way down, you can get your thumb right above the cut. So you've got real control over what happens here. Don't get too enthusiastic here, Becker. So, but if you and you shift back, you've got a tremendous amount of chop, and it does chop. We'll show that a little later.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
It's a little less than 11 inch. I think it's 10 and 13/16 inches long, which sounds like 11 inches to me.
Yeah.
And it weighs just a pound and a third, and you felt the balance on it.
Yeah, and I was a little bit surprised to see the belly more pronounced up front on the production model versus the prototype. The prototype had a lot more blade height down here at the hilt, which took a little bit away from doing your fine work, and this is definitely an improvement, but it's also throwing all that forward weight up here at the sweet spot, which is going to be quite nice.
What's really important is to not get too much weight forward. It'll chop better, but it won't do little stuff as well, because one of the things that people don't understand or frequently don't realize is that you're working going down this way. But also, if you have a lot of weight there, your hand is not designed to bring the weight back. So it tires the wrist out pretty quickly, which is why people like a machete for smaller stuff rather than an axe. I mean, everything's a compromise. In every design of everything that ever has been, there's a compromise. There's a series of compromises. And it also has to do with the fact that what do you really want the knife to do? And this is a general purpose jungle tool. The guy that used to run the Jungle Operations Training Center, and I looked all over for his name, I have it somewhere in the house, which is to say it could be lost for centuries, said that a 12-inch machete was the ideal jungle knife, an ideal survival knife. And so essentially this is an almost 12-inch machete that chops, because a machete will hurt you when it chops with it over a long period of time. So, and most machetes are not designed to do this either.
No, they're not. And speaking of, we were talking about balance and doing the small stuff. I like to refer to it as trying to get the fulcrum of the lever, because this is essentially a knife is a lever. And I like to see balance set up to where the fulcrum is not only a small, short portion of the blade up here, making it small, but it's right in the spot where you really want to do the work. That way, your pivot point is very acute, and no matter how heavy it is back here or up here, you can swing the weight easily. And that
I've not thought of it in those terms, but that's a good way to put it.
that is that's a very common trait I find in Becker knives and tools, and it's one of the reasons why they work so well, in my opinion anyway. But
music to my ears.
but going to just the overall look of the knife, like you, I'm a fan of a straight clip versus a sweeping clip. And this is still stabby. This is still very, very pointy. But we still have a lot of meat in the tip. So I wouldn't be afraid of breaking it.
You can do with these, and you can do this with pretty much any big knife that has a lanyard hole. If you are stuck and this is the only knife you've got and you're skinning or you have to do some point work, taking a lanyard and putting the lanyard on your forearm back here, you can actually use the knife to do stuff. This is not something I recommend to do, except if it's the only thing that you're going to use the knife you have with you, and if this is all you got. It's nice to know how to do it. But don't do it without the lanyard, otherwise you're going to lose control. But if it's stuck up there, you've got quite a bit of control.
And the beauty about that is that the belly here isn't so deep like a bolo would be, to where your hand is relatively small on the blade. The blade isn't going to be, very, very large compared to the size of your hand. So you can get in nice and tight and nice and close. And like you said, with the lanyard, you eliminate that back end weight, and it's much easier.
And one of the things too is that anything that you're going to use in the backcountry, in the boonies, is something that has to be relatively, you're going to be weight conscious.
Mm-hmm.
If you're carrying a 3-pound knife or a 4-pound tomahawk or whatever, that's going to weigh on you. So this is just a little, I mean, 1 1/3 pounds, and there's a lot of utility in that 1 1/3 pounds as far as the weight to utility ratio.
Yeah, definitely. That is a huge factor.
And it do chop.
It does chop.
And it do slice. And we'll find some berry canes. And maybe we'll run down and chop on some of my neighbor's bamboo. I know he will not be upset about that.
Well, we definitely have some footage of that. Speaking of slicing,
yes,
I was comparing this knife last night. I'm just eyeballing the edge geometry here, and I'm comparing it to the King, the BK9. That's the Becker Bowie we all know, love, and we're very familiar with. And for those of us that haven't gotten a chance to get hands on this, just by eyeballing, I see the edge geometry a little bit steeper than the 9, making it more slicing.
One of the things, and I really hate to admit this in a public forum, but hanging around with the great Jerry Fisk and JR and Kroll and some of the people who are really, really good actually at building knives as opposed to me, is look at the competition choppers. But they all have long grinds, steep grinds, tall grinds. And the reason is because that really they slice, they dice, they chop. The 9 is a pretty close ideal, and from a utility standpoint, most of the people who've used it would agree that it's about right. And this is about right. Mm-hmm. One thing I want to mention, because there's been a lot of discussion already about it, this relief at the top is there for a reason. When you're going in, that's one thing, but when you're going out, breaking this edge creates, according to Jim Bensinger, he calls it an airfoil. And it allows an easy exit out of a soft material. So, and that includes things like berry canes. Because a lot of the time what you're doing is clearing a campsite, and if you've got a bunch of blackberries or raspberries or whatever, you want to be able to get those out of the way.
Yeah.
And one thing that drives me nuts is you'll make a nice clean cut through a berry cane, and there'll be a little hinge, about like that.
Yeah.
And the cane never falls in a nice way. It always ends up where you have to end up taking 3 or 4 whacks at it when you're trying to get it because it'll fall into things. I want that berry cane to fall straight to the ground. I want it to look like a fresh one.
Yeah.
And so we'll play with that a little bit.
Speaking of that,
yes.
This wedge spine. There's been an awful lot of observation that it's going to destroy a baton. If you get this knife in your hand, the spine swedged down is probably right around 5/16 of an inch in measurement. Probably not 5/16. I mean 5/32. 5/32 of an inch. That's not going to destroy your baton any worse than just a squared spine 3/16 knife. So I wouldn't be overly concerned about my baton, right, especially when you're in a baton supermarket like the Woods.
Right. Yeah, and somebody made a comment the other day, and look, I baton stuff. I think it's important that I be able to do that because it gives you so much more control when you're splitting stuff.
Yeah.
So that's important to me. But somebody said, well, hell, the baton's the last thing you throw in the fire when you break camp.
Yeah.
You know, they're not, and I'm you know, I have the German disease because I are one, and I've got several batons up at the shop that I use, and I'm like, oh well, I need to do this to it, I need to do that to it, and it's stupid because I'm going to throw the son of a bitch away.
Yeah, I learned the lesson of don't get attached to a baton. The first baton I made, because it was destroyed by the time I was done. So I mean, knives just tear them up. This knife isn't going to be any worse than any other out there. So.
No, but it really has a good feel, and to me, at any rate, I mean, everything that I make feels good in my hand.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a hand close to mine, you're going to like it. I hope people with smaller and larger hands like it, but we have 2 people here who pick up everything I make and go, well, you could make this about 3/4 of an inch longer and it'd be much better. Vic comes to mind right offhand, and people with very small hands are not going to be quite as happy as people with my more or less medium large hand. But it's and one other thing I've found, and that is that when I design things that I want, they tend to be much more successful designs than just designing something that fit a niche.
Yeah.
So this is a knife, the BK16, which I'm extremely fond of and think very highly of and sells pretty well. I wanted that knife. The Meshax is something I wanted, and it sold well for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a 30-plus-year-old design, and it was the first one I ever designed. And you know what? For a first design, it was pretty darn good. But it was, I've had, didn't have the knowledge that I have now 35 years later.
Well, I happen to agree that the Meshax is a wonderful knife. People that are familiar with my channel, they know I love that knife. And the 16, I'd put that knife against any utility knife at any price, and it's a fantastic design.
I do.
I like the way you think. But this knife, you can feel the balance, you can feel its movement, you can feel its capabilities. Even beginners, when they hold this one, they're going to love it because it will speak to you. The handle, if you've never felt a Becker handle, it's the same handle on all large-scale Becker knives. Once you feel it, you're sold. It's all you're ever going to want. And Ethan, I'm excited about it.
Me too, boss.
I'm ready to get my hands on it.
All right.
Thanks for stopping in. There'll be more. I'll have some stuff over the rest of the gathering, so stay tuned. Get out in the woods, be safe, and we'll see you on the next one.